Okay, we are now recording this Chaos Value Working Group meeting on March 26th. Ooh, in the meeting minutes, which I shared in the chat, if you could please add yourself and share how you're feeling today.
Somebody took my tepid away.
Good. Well,
Stealing your tepid. There you go.
So, Eric, is this a freshwater aquarium or a saltwater aquarium?
It is a freshwater aquarium.
Much easier.
Yes. I wanted something that is easy enough. And yeah, I had one growing up and I didn't want to dive into something completely different.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I've had a freshwater aquarium many years, and they're a blast.
They are. Here's the picture of what it looks like today.
That's great.
beautiful.
Thank you.
You have fish in it yet?
That will come in a couple weeks.
Okay. Just kind of getting the water where it needs to be, and
Yeah, building the bacteria, getting the filter.
very cool.
Is this a metaphor for rebooting this group? Because I'm down for it. Hey everyone, just wanted to start. Yeah, like I was just saying, I'm newer to the crowd, and I've been really enthusiastic with CHAOSS. Before it was CHAOSS, I've been playing with the Bacteria tool set since I got into dev advocacy a number of years ago, and I was talking to Georg recently, and just basically pitched the idea of how I think of value and what I've been looking to try to provide somewhere in the CHAOSS organization, which is value as at most a step away from financial incentive to fund community work. I've done this math in the many ways you have to, always in the perspective of enterprise IT organizations, as a developer advocate, as a VP of a startup trying to fund open source community projects, as an open source contributor elsewhere. And I'm also a big fan of the books and been an editor in some of Jono's work and Mary Thingvall's most recent one on the business of developer relations. And there are patterns that exist in that space. And I've really, I'm an advocate for that, like this very practical, business oriented, definitely imperfect measurements, but like they're imperfect measurements that end up getting funding in the corporate and enterprise spaces. So with that as a premise, that's where Georg and I spent some time a week or so ago. And with that, I wanted to see where everyone else is coming from and to talk about what your interests are, and then work through, first off, concerns, because a lot of great work has gone into this group that doesn't need to be lost. It just needs to be put in the right context, and then move forward with the mission that we've talked about, and see where that brings us. How's that sound?
Sounds great. So thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, thanks.
I have a few questions and just a thought.
Yeah,
maybe
please.
a question. So, so one of the things that has come up over the last, I don't know, 6 months and maybe more recently was the connection of the work in the CHAOSS project as a whole with OSPOs, or say the to-do group. I don't know if you're familiar with the to-do group. Yep. So
Yeah.
So how can we help kind of provide insight for these types of folks? So I don't know if this work you see connecting in that regard.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the primary, if we were to, flesh out the core personas of who we're talking to, I think we're at the intersection. If we talk about value in a way that allows people to provide a financial incentive, we're really talking to leadership of OSPOs. We're talking to leadership of developer relations teams, and we're definitely talking to the brilliant practices that are coming together under the to-do group
Okay.
and the sustainability groups adjacent to them.
Yep. Okay. That
Yeah,
sounds
funny enough, I spent this weekend going through the redesign of the to-do group website and was reading their metrics guide. I think that's one of the ones where it's very poachable information that's readily available, that
perfect.
if we kind of standardize and champion, I think we could make a partnership with them and just let that expertise flow into our metrics.
Great. So then that kind of leads into my comment then, which is coming out of the working groups. One of the things we've also been focusing on is not just the development of the metrics for metrics' sake, but really thinking through how the metrics can be put into practice. So for example, the work that is going on in the D&I working group, a lot of great metrics have come out of that. And right now we're working on a D&I badging program that brings these metrics kind of to the forefront, that people can interact with them and use them in ways that have meaningful impact. The metrics that are in, say, the risk working group or the evolution working group, they are being deployed in tools like Grimoire Lab and in Augur, and Sean's on with Augur. So that, like, again, there's a meaningful, it's not just metrics for metrics' sake, but we're also looking at how these metrics can be deployed and have an impact on the world. So this is less of a question and more of a comment. And I think you hit it on your last statement, which was thinking about how metrics in the value working group can be meaningful beyond just the folks that are on these calls.
I respect that for sure. It's it's definitely a, I don't want to be so trite as to say like crawl, walk, run, but it is like a define what's already out there in a way that people can pattern against, and then make that pattern exceptionally easy to run.
Yes.
And I think that's where the tool chain connects with the theory that we're trying to evolve in this group.
Yep.
And I fully admit, like, I've been a longtime lurker, first time caller, if you will, in these groups, and so I don't know exactly how we get there. I'll be looking at all of you for guidance,
Yep.
but am very excited to hear that other people are interested in like getting towards metrics that can be deployed into the field of advocacy and OSPOs, and get into people's hands, and really keep communities moving forward financially, as well as with their exposure to D&I and an understanding of their risk profile, but really keeping that missing element of financial incentive to fund this. I think so many people fall short, and I keep hoping it's a solved problem that we shouldn't have to care about anymore. And the more I ask friends, like I was talking to Ashley McNamara, now Willis over in Microsoft, like, how are they doing it? And I'm like, do you have a standard tool set yet? And like, oh God, no, it's still like everyone's still doing their own thing.
Yes. And so, I mean, what you're talking about, I think kind of butts up against one of the holy grails in open source, which is actually trying to figure out how we measure exactly what you're talking about. I mean, a lot of, when you're talking about speaking to folks out in the field, I'm the same way. So when you ask, how do you measure value, or how do you determine financial impact? Lots of times it's like, well, everybody else is doing it, so obviously there's something there. But if you can start unlocking that, that'd be great.
One of the things that I'm really interested in is, and I've mentioned this in meetings past, is creating a kind of a value prospectus dashboard, kind of modeled after a financial prospectus document, right? Which is a document that that companies create for potential investors, right? So it's a very standard way of describing financial value for investors. So I'd really like to be able to create some sort of value prospectus tooling.
I love that perspective. Yeah, the dashboarding of it fits
just
smoothly.
a standard way of sharing value that can maybe lead towards investment, or even just letting your boss know that the work you're doing has value.
Fantastic. Well said.
Yeah, and we don't, I think, have clearly identified what are the components of that prospectus? What are the measures of value? So somewhere I think we agree that the dependency chain and distribution library distribution systems is part of it, but there's a lot of software dependency that's not distributed through a library distributor. So how do we identify those as well? And where is that software being used and generating value?
Yeah, very interesting. So if we could just take a moment, if y'all don't mind, since I haven't met most of you, could we just take a breather and just do a quick round of who you are, a little bit of background or why you care about metrics? Definitely doesn't have to be the whole history. I gave a decent one already. I've done DevRel and corporate and startup kind of spaces back and forth. In each, I found some form of a pattern that of not necessarily the best data, but definitely the same myths that people will fund projects based off. Pattern matching being one of them. To your point, Matt or Sean, and I really care about it being incredibly easy for people to justify this so that they can do the hard work of community, which is, fostering meaningful connections of people, processes, and ultimately the code that they build together. Matt, I know a lot of people know you, but just for the sake of going down the line, would you mind a brief
Sure.
intro of what you care about value?
Yeah. So, well, I care about chaos, like just the metrics as a whole. So, I've been involved in open source for a while, doing a lot of work in the corporate side of things. So this is typically where I've been. So I've been working with the Linux Foundation for many years, working with things like SPDX and Fossology. So in the license domain. Value to me, I think it kind of goes back to that holy grail thing. This is one that just has a really hard time being solved. It's also really hard to talk about, I'm finding. So it's maybe a little easier to talk about risk, or a little bit easier to talk about the evolution of a project and what we might look at. So value represents that kind of interesting, I don't know how to model it, kind of space for me. But at the same time, like I mentioned earlier, it's like the one thing that people are asking for constantly. So it's on one hand very amorphous, and on the other hand very, very much requested. And so how do we map these two things is completely interesting. So that's
amazing.
Yeah, kind of my interest in value in particular.
I love that. Just going down the line of heads on Zoom here for me. Kevin, would you mind a brief intro?
Kevin Lombard. I'm a PhD student. I work with Matt in Omaha. I'm interested in the different perspectives that people have on value and that organizations have on value, which to what Matt was talking about, actually these different perspectives are exactly what complicate understanding value, is that we all understand it a little bit differently. So I'm interested in those different perspectives, and if there's a way to standardize the presentation of metrics that can allow us all to kind of determine value on our own. So
very cool. Vinod?
I'm Vinod Ahuja. I'm a PhD student. I also work with Matt, and I'm in the same place with Kevin in Omaha. And I work in the open source domain, especially in the value area. When I started exploring open source, I was unsure how companies are getting value from contributing their resources and employees. That's what motivated me to look into this domain. And that's where my thought is I'm still figuring out. I ran a survey contacting companies who are engaged with open source and asking them how they drive value. And in that, I found that none of them have any kind of metric so far or any strategy to measure the value. They're just doing it, and no concrete results.
I'll make a comment here. So Vinod actually put together that we'd be happy to share here that was reaching out to, I don't know how many organizations you reached out to.
Almost 500.
What?
Yeah. No, our response rate was not great, but reached out to 500 organizations to kind of get a sense on how they understand value and how they derive value. So this is something that should probably fit squarely in this working group.
Yeah, that research is essential, and also incredibly impressive. I'm sure you got to.
Not 500 responses, it's 500
Sure.
emails sent.
But
Okay.
you send and the responses are 15.
Okay, brutal.
Yeah.
But also, good effort. It's important.
You're
But yeah,
emailing
You can
people
start
who
making
get email
inroads
all the
with
time.
the group.
yeah.
If we
Okay.
can start making inroads with folks at the to-do group, a survey like this could probably be deployed a little less, I don't mean to say blindly, but with a little bit more focus.
Yeah, and with a little bit more trust, right? To Do Group has a long history of reaching out to a known quantity of audiences that also fit into that core persona. So yeah, I think
We've thought
leveraging
about
partnership.
the Linux Foundation as well. So
Hmm.
Mike Dolan, we just haven't yet. We wanted to take a look at the results first, but we may be able to deploy something like this coming out of this working group.
Good. No, that sounds great.
Well,
Cool.
While we're on the topic of the survey, have you reached out to Lawrence Hecht, who is creating the to-do group survey?
No, I haven't, or we haven't.
Okay, that might be another. I can make the introduction. He
Can
is
you?
always looking for ways to improve the to-do group survey, and if we have questions that we can sneak in,
Yeah, actually, yeah. Could you make that intro?
I will do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can be a fly on that wall, please allow me. That sounds interesting.
Okay, I will make that approach as the Chaos Value Working Group.
Yeah, definitely.
Love it.
Actually, that probably gives it a bit more, a bit more trust and a bit more grounding
Yeah.
with the foundation project, and this is
Cool.
something we're all interested in. Thank you, Gaylord.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, Sean, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Yeah, I'm Sean Goggins. I am associate professor of computer science. I've been Bennett's colleague on this CHAOSS project journey, so my interest is generally in metrics. I have looked at value in a lot of my early work in open source from the perspective of how does leadership evolve in an open source ecosystem, and how does that evolution of leadership change or act differently depending on the size, scope, and way a project organizes itself. So I looked a lot at web frameworks back in the early tens, I guess, and I continue to have an interest in value because I think it's not one thing. I think it means in different organizational contexts, value is derived in very specific ways. In some corporate contexts, the value is, am I avoiding a cost? So I think when I look at a project like Kubernetes, it's avoiding a cost and avoiding a competitive threat, and that's the value, and that's why there's investment. I think in other open source projects like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you have kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, where how can I provide a service that it produces a profit, generates revenue, based on the fact that directors and vice presidents of organizations are unwilling to put something that is purely open sourced without a support mechanism in place into their data centers.
Mm-hmm.
And so Red Hat Enterprise Linux identified this revenue opportunity, and so it's on the positive side of the income statement as opposed to the cost side of the income statement. And I think value is, and then there's also, of course, there's probably a balance sheet value to the core of Linux as well. So there are all these dimensions of value: cost avoidance, generating revenue, balance sheet value, for enterprises that all, I think, revolve around the scarce resource of people. And so if I think about this as a social problem and what is the commons, increasingly the conversations I have with people about what are the commons that we are overgrazing in open source, it is the people. There are more projects and more work than there are people. So I think value touches all of that.
Love that metaphor. Very cool. And Jorg, I've talked to you a good bit. I want to get King. Did you, if you're willing and interested, I saw that you were in here as well. Or Gaokun. I see the name changed.
I can also go in the meantime.
That'd be great, please.
My name is Georg. I worked with all these awesome folks on this call. Matt, Vinod, Sean, Kevin, on the on just understanding open source and how organizations engage with open source. And I'm one of the co-founders of the CHAOSS project. And now I work at Biturgia, where it's our business to provide metrics. And so as a co-lead of the CHAOSS project, I'm always looking to advance the metrics, but then also it makes my life easier in selling Biturgia services.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I should also mention I lead the Augur project.
Oh, awesome. That is helpful. Good. And King, would you like to introduce yourself? If not,
Hello.
no worries. Oh, hey, we can hear you. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I think it's a bad network, so I'm sorry. I input the letter in the. Okay. I'm sorry. I can't hear you very clearly. May I put the letter in the? Okay.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, King.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you. I'm a rookie. I'm second. Yesterday is my first time to link in this this work group. I'm very interested in it. Now maybe now the network is okay. I come from Huawei.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, open source management department, and I think our company is now is focused on the open source, how to manage it, and we focus many. Later we will release more and more and open more and more projects, and I want to here to study and to contribute for this community. Okay.
Very cool. Thank you for introducing yourself and welcome.
It's nice to meet you.
Welcome.
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
Thanks for joining us.
Nice to meet you, everyone. Yeah.
So
okay.
cool.
Okay. Thank you. So I muted. I listened to your. Okay. Okay.
Sounds good. Good.
Forgive me, my English is poor. Sorry.
No, you're doing great. Thank you. Thanks for participating. It's wonderful to have you here. You're very welcome here. Good. Okay. Well, thanks for the introductions, everyone. I appreciate it. As I said, long time listener, first time caller, and Georg was energized by just a fresh angle on what Value Group could do. So I did, as I would say in kind of the startup space, I YOLO'd an update because you only live once, and offered some changes. But I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge like the slight shift to scope that I think most people, it sounds like people are energized by, but this is a space like I want, disagreements are great. I think it adds value to kind of talk through angles from all of them. So I just want to say, like, if you haven't seen the repo recently, please take a look through. You may find broken links. That will definitely happen. But the core of the sort of mission value statement twist is towards something that states that we're looking to gather metrics that help secure funding for community work. And these metrics, to add some sort of specific scope around it, I think it's important to say these metrics are at furthest one step removed from direct financial incentive to investment. I think a pretty strong statement along the financial aspect will give enough differentiation to the value group to make it meaningful as a contrast to, say, risk or D&I even. I think some of the metrics that were existing are meaningful, absolutely meaningful metrics for a community. But I can guarantee you it wouldn't get my projects funded in any of the corporations I've worked for, including like Intel, Dell, friends at Microsoft, like these corporations or startups. I've done venture capitalist pitch, and I have a decent idea of what they expect and how they consider value from community.
I am Pied Piper.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they just want to see those daily active users go up and to the right sometimes, or like literally I've GitHub stars as an indicator. I think there is room in this future scope to consider the impact of vanity metrics, not due to their substance, but due to their value. That there is a perception of an increase of vanity metrics year over year or month over month that will lead to funding directly. You can see that in the CHAOSS community. You can see that in the VC startup space. Battery Ventures has a public index, as they call it, of open source projects that uses stars as an indicator. So with all that in mind, I think the financial incentive is really the interesting differentiator. But I wanted to keep some space and say, like, do people have thoughts about that? Does that sound interesting? Do you see concerns or topics to explore there?
I don't see concerns, so I'm
No.
very excited about this direction. I think it's very focused, and it's nice to see a mission that has 2 sentences, where the last sentence is basically, I mean, just summing it up, direct financial incentive to invest. I mean, that's the metrics that push us in that direction, I think, is where you're going here. So
cool.
Yeah, so I love it.
I approve.
Well, damn.
Easy to understand. That's a good metric of the value mission statement is can I understand it easily?
Can I understand it easily in 2 sentences or fewer?
Yeah.
Good. All right, great. Well, if others are agreeable to it, I think, with the concerns in mind from Tuesday's meeting, sorry to miss that. I think it'd be great to look through what I've currently done, like the previous metrics that existed, I just put into an archive folder. They don't need to live there forever. It's just this temporary idea of like, what are these metrics as they currently exist? Could we either reframe them to fit this new mission, or do they fit somewhere else in the CHAOSS project, either in common or some other vertical? So if it makes sense to others, why don't we take the time to walk through these one by one and discuss whether we feel it could fit back in, or whether it should possibly migrate elsewhere.
One question before we start that, has the sort of bureaucratic or administrative artifact that they're released metrics been discussed at all?
That's what this is.
I think that's what we're talking about now. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you walk me through? I definitely don't understand the full impact of the concern there. So I want to make sure I do.
When a metric's released, that's sort of our statement to the larger community that this is a metric that you can use. And I hold this sort of point of view that once we release a metric, we can evolve it, we can change it, but if we take it away and there are people who have built tools around it or are relying on it, then we become sort of a not dependable part of the metric ecosystem. It's like if you remove an interface.
It's a breaking change. Yeah.
Right. It's like, it's a breaking change. We break a lot of other people's stuff. And so that's the concern. It doesn't mean that software or metrics aren't released and they have a deprecation notice at some point.
Yeah.
We just don't have a formal process for that yet. And so if we want to deprecate some metrics, we'll just have to come up with a process for that.
Yeah. And possibly naive question, but worth asking because we have a lot of metrics heads on here. Do we have a methodology to knowing if people are using metrics? I think of that, like when I think about features in a product, part of the way I like to decipher whether we're gonna end of life it is whether it's adopted. So is there any way to trace usage?
No, not at the moment, and probably never. So
Yeah.
there's a right. So this is a scope question.
Yeah.
So how far out does the CHAOSS project lay eyes on the work that's occurring here centrally here? So, I mean, could in theory we knock on the door of every organization and ask
No.
if they're right?
No, absolutely not. That's not the answer. But cool. That's a fair answer.
Yep. And so we've got to find. We're always trying to find that spot somewhere that is not that, and somewhere that is not just we put the metrics out there and just kind of shrug our shoulders and be like, maybe they're not. So we're trying to find. We're always working to find that spot as to the story that we can tell that's important, but living with the resources that we have.
Yeah.
So what I want to add here is I think of several feedback channels that we do have. We do have blog posts, people writing about metrics. And I do try to see what people are using. Not that I have a systematic approach to this, but when people blog about CHAOSS and I find out about it, or they write about it, I add it to the news coverage on the website.
Oh, very cool.
So I try to keep track, and you see I'm a little out of date. There's newer stuff in March already.
That's still very impressive that you're doing that. So
yeah, so we have a history of how the project evolves and how people are using metrics, what they're thinking.
Fantastic.
The other source that we have are the conferences where people talk to us. They talk to us specifically about how they're using metrics and so on. So we get a feel for that there. And then the third feedback channel that I'm hoping will work is the podcast, which we're recording the pilot episode tomorrow.
Who's excited to podcast? Okay, I love podcasting. It's a strangely addictive medium for me.
Additionally, I'd like to add. Sorry to interrupt, Matt.
Oh no, you're good. Please.
A lot of these metrics, when we identify them and define them, we're observing them in the wild. Mm-hmm. So anecdotally, we can say these have been used elsewhere because we've seen them and we have examples of them.
Yeah, and I think anecdotes are such a fact of life that they shouldn't be dismissed, even though they're by definition anecdotal. That's literally how businesses make strategic decisions, with or without the word strategy meaning something. So I think that's completely fair.
Yeah, one of the examples here is the project velocity metric. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes. Yep.
So the project velocity metric is taking what the CNCF folks released 3 years ago, and we just documented that as one of our metrics.
Oh, very cool. Okay. Okay, great. So with that in mind, can we just recap? So what ones under value are currently released as opposed to pending release?
What Georg has on the screen right now.
Okay, so the social currency metric system is the one that's out there? Oh, that's ecosystem value.
I think the actual metric is social currency. So there's a focus area, and then under the focus area, the specific metrics are the ones that are clickable.
Cool. So this is all the stuff under value group because there was also focus areas and value group. I'm following now.
Do we want to talk about the format of how we release these metrics real quick? I'm not sure if Matt's familiar with it. The goal question metric format or the focus areas.
You want to make the introduction?
Yeah, that'd be great, Kevin, please.
Okay, so the metrics themselves are across all the work groups are organized into focus areas. And then we use a goal question metric format to display them. right?
Right.
So in the example here, the goal is to estimate the value of an open source project ecosystem. So we would then identify metrics within that focus area that achieve that goal, and then each metric would have a question that answers kind of a more specific question, right?
And I'm familiar with the per metric question template, so that makes sense. Cool. So when we're talking about compatibility of release, so keeping the current focus areas, is that as important as keeping the metrics in all of it, in everyone's opinion?
No.
I would say no.
They're highly fungible.
As a matter of fact, that might actually be a way that we can
That would be really relieving.
move some of these metrics. We create a focus area that is that we're not actively working on, and we could just move the metrics into that focus area.
Yeah, that's definitely like the minimum viable option for sure. So that's great. I think there's also an opportunity here. Like there is a lot of meat in these. I think it doesn't hit like the one step removed from financial incentive as it's currently worded. But maybe we can take a quick glance at each one, and if depending on how people are feeling, we can open issues on the repo and work more one-on-one or individually to get it there.
And that sounds good. One last piece of like asset that you should probably have on your radar.
Please.
That is the spreadsheet that I put in the chat.
Yeah, what's up with that? That's pretty deep.
Yeah, so the spreadsheet, you can see the tabs across the bottom. Those are just the different working groups.
Mm-hmm.
So then within value, you see the focus areas: labor investment, innovation value, downstream value. So those, living wage. And so this is where we track the focus areas.
Yes.
What has actually been released, what we're kind of working on. See what I'm saying? So it's a way for, so that's what this is. This is a tracking spreadsheet.
Yeah. So it's the canonical like release track.
Yeah, this isn't public facing. I mean, anybody can view it, but it's usually just used by the working groups to organize work around metrics.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Yep. And it honestly, it's worked pretty well in our last two releases, so we keep updating it. So as you're moving these forward or rearranging, I do ask that you kind of reflect those changes here as well. I mean, we can do this collectively, but.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can take that next step, and I'll get on your calendar if I need a tutorial.
Yep.
Great. Yep, and it's in the notes file. So is there, before we move on from that, are there any upcoming release dates like intended, or is it on a cadence, a calendar cadence?
We just actually moved to a rolling release.
Okay.
So we, as Value has a metric that they believe is ready for release, we make it available for a 30-day public comment, and then once it's past that period and all things look good, then it's Georg just brought up the rolling release, the continuous metric contribution. But then we'll also have kind of a regular release cadence that occurs twice a year that captures everything. The idea was for a while we were releasing twice a year, every 6 months, and it kind of disincentivized releasing a metric in that first month.
Yeah.
Everybody would just kind of wait till that 6-month window and kind of force everything right down. So we want to give people the opportunity within their working groups to release the work that they're doing on a regular basis.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that idea as well. Good. That makes a ton of sense. All right, so I think that's some good context. Should we take a peek through the metrics next?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Good. Well, so if we could go to the repository, I added some additional commentary when going through that in the archive folder. Perfect. Each one of these, I had like a little bit of an opinion why it didn't meet the goal as is. But again, I think with our collective minds and a little bit of massaging, we could get this to meet the scope or find it a home. If I guess that's one other question I have. Would it be a breaking change in the way we're conceiving it, Sean, if we were to move this to a different part of the CHAOSS project?
No,
Okay,
I don't
perfect.
think so. I don't think people care about what working group it comes from. Do you?
Okay, good. Yeah, it's all pretty abstracted away.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're given it to like the common group, for example, though, you probably need to get them to
Yeah, we need to
the
get
buy-in.
them to say, yeah,
to accept it, right?
Right. But these are metrics, I think, for the number of working groups that would
You
accept.
just have a working group called Other.
No, it sounds like worst case we're gonna go with a better name for orphaned metrics inside the value group, and then I think the best case we'll find a way of reformatting this to work. Also, let me close my door. My partner and I are both working from home, and I think we're competing for audio at the moment.
Huh.
And then
One,
go ahead.
I was going to say one easy way to separate them out initially might be to look at the perspective. So for some of these in here, it is very much from a developer perspective. And if we're moving to an organization's understanding of value, we could immediately pull out the way a developer understands value and move that into a focus area that is just like, we understand people. We get that people understand value in different ways. We're not focusing on how developers or contributors understand value. We're focusing on how organizations understand value.
So I'd love to get into the specifics of that, because I think as we do, when we talk about a developer's conceptualization of value, it'll be a question of like, developers want to get paid as much as organizations want to get paid. If we go with that as kind of the common denominator of the goal, but I think there's a developer considering value. Like I think a developer values quality, right? Like they value code coverage and this type of quality, and they value longevity. So this type of avoiding the bust factor, or whatever our better term for that is, where in a very different context, or like, can I financially survive on open source contribution? They are, in my mind, I consider that as an individual contributor thinking as a business as themselves. Yes, this is very capitalistic, possibly American-centric model of thinking of it, but I think we have to, like, as an individual person who's trying to make a living, they are thinking like, will I get paid for this? Which I think fits very well within the context of what we're talking about here. It's just the question, is it that type of value, or is it like the internal value of a well-defined open source project? Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, and
but in that example, how would see, like, the job opportunities metric feels very much kind of like it's a human resources metric.
Cool.
You could. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, this is a great moment where like we can connect the, and this could be seen from multiple angles. It could definitely be an HR type thing. I'm gonna link in our notes real quick to a way in which this is used for, so job market.
Will this align with the new mission statement, like, which is more focused on like community as a community looking for funding? This perspective as a job market is as an individual looking for funding.
So, and that's where it's it is a question of what the definition, like who's searching for value in this case. I think, value. I guess I'm seeing your point a little bit more clearly now. Now that I talked it out, Kevin, that like, as a developer, you're making a little bit of a gambler. Like, is this skill valuable enough that I can make a living on it? As opposed to saying like, is this valuable to get funding for something to sustain the growth of an organization? Yeah, I
Right.
I see your point. I think you're dead on.
I,
It's a different perspective.
and from a developer perspective, I'll use an anecdote.
Please.
Our Google Summer of Code applications this year are very heavily skewed towards machine learning and blockchain focused single sign on.
Oh
And
God,
so,
blockchain.
yeah, so I think developers or future developers recognize sort of what's hot. I think security would be another thing in that bucket. And they do gravitate towards those kinds of projects because they recognize they'll be paid better with
Yeah.
those skills.
Yeah. It's like I'm not a sysadmin anymore. I'm a DevOps engineer.
Yeah.
There is just like, and you know, I'm not a community manager because then you'll pay me 50,000 a year. But if I'm a developer advocate, well,
Yeah, and like I'm talking, the projects we've put out there on Augur anyway, the last 2 years have been less sexy, and we've had 5 or 6 applications, and currently we're at like 35 pull
dang.
requests. It's we're stunned
Yeah.
by just the I think, and I don't know if it's chaos has become more well known or we chose sexy topics, but
Little
the
column
ones.
A.
Yeah, little column A, but I think we're getting a lot more interest in the 2 sexy topics that I mentioned, the ones that have better job market value.
I see. So, so going back to full circle to the job opportunity metric, I linked you something from like a VC that includes job postings as a metric of. It's a longer article. It might not be worth going through here, but one of the core metrics that they aggregate into this idea of like what open source community you should try to fund in this open core or SaaS based business model depends on like they query the different job APIs and look to see if a project is being mentioned more often. So the month over month growth in mentioning, like, let's say Redis, they're like, all right, well, maybe we should reach out to Redis Labs and try to fund them a little bit more. Versus if you see a decline, like, okay, well, maybe the market's moving. Like, so it's by no means like the best science in the world, but it is a clear usage of that data to make financial decisions.
That I can link it directly with the living wage popularity considering metric. Like that was in consideration, living wage popularity. If you look
I'm
at
sorry,
the
Which one? Popularity?
popularity in the living wage focus area.
Yeah, there's a relationship I think you're saying between project popularity and the amount of money you can make. Is that your point, Vinod?
Yes,
Wait,
yeah. So
that is under consideration. It's not
oh,
ready,
it's in
but
this.
like, yeah, if you look at the Excel sheet, tracking sheet, in the living wage, we have a popularity.
correct. Yeah, that's not in the archive. That's in the primary metrics one because I think that one needs like a little bit more detail, but it is very much something that funds or gets things defunded. Like I grew a project to over 1,000 stars and received more funding. It's stupid on the surface, but it is a vanity metric that organizations are tracking.
So King put in a chat comment as well.
Oh yes. A lot of companies considering value equals money, but LF can find method value of the developers.
So I think in one of the things I think his point about the LF, and I can use Hyperledger Indy as an example, is the tools that help the developers take that project, deploy it, and play with it are super important. And Hyperledger Indy doesn't do a good job of that right now. So it's a blockchain SSO that exists on the Hyperledger blockchain, but the indie projects are they're not very well maintained in terms of the tools that the developers would use to actually put them to use. So there's value in projects that sort of lift up a larger enterprise and make it usable.
Interesting.
So they're yeah, that's an example of where LF may. And I don't know that that's distinct from how an organization might value a project more than others, but I think that's these are places where contributions would be valued.
Yeah. It's interesting. It doesn't ring my internal understanding of like, could I get funding for this?
Yeah.
But I see where you're going with it, and it's worth exploring. So if we're looking, so we only have a couple minutes left. So I'm wondering if I could see if anyone else has time and interest in working through the metrics that I have put into the archive folder that need to come back out of that folder. If I could ask anyone to work through and making a new issue, exploring what that metric means based on our new mission, and then presenting a PR that brings it out of the archive folder, maybe with a new update.
Would you?
Sorry, go ahead.
For workflow, do you want us to just open an issue?
Yes, I think opening an issue would be a great place to start, and then work through that into a pull request, and those can be open, and we can talk through those.
Basically saying this is the issue to talk about what to do with job opportunities.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then another issue for a different metric. And
yeah, I can commit to making the issues for each of that, but I think it'd be more important. Like, are people interested, or does anyone have time, like, let's say before the next meeting to do so?
Yeah.
And Kevin, you had a point you wanted to say. Yeah. Please.
So I'm not actually sure. I'm not actually sure how they would fit until I have a better understanding of what our focus areas are going to be. So for me, the way to kind of the first step of understanding if these metrics fit within what we're doing and where they fit is to maybe kind of outline some general focus areas that fit within our kind of our desired area, and then from there, perhaps we can say that some of these metrics that are there don't quite fit with these focus areas that we have, but perhaps there's a focus area that we could create to throw them into. I don't know.
I also would
just
like
a thought.
What Kevin is saying. I would like to leave them maybe in the archive folder for now, and then a month or two down the road, once we have a better understanding of the new direction of the working group, then we can reevaluate how they fit in. We just have to do it before the next release. That's all.
I see.
Yeah, I would second that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Will the placement of them in the archive folder have any effect on the generation of the website?
No.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and so mostly I want to continue the conversation. So I personally care less about these specific metrics, but more about fostering the continued conversation of like, how do we dial in what it looks like to translate a mission into specific metrics. Focus groups, I don't have a strong opinion on yet. My mind kind of leads to org chart oriented ones or business scale oriented ones. But at the end of the day, if the metric meets the goal of being adjacent or directly related to finance, I say we're going down the right path. So yeah, to try to be brief, because we're at the top of the hour, to say like, if you have ways in which that translation can start happening, please, like, let's continue the discussion through issues in the near future. Any other takeaways before we drop off, or?
This is great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to see everybody here. And yeah, thanks for the warm welcome. Let's keep hacking on this and get good information for people through CHAOSS. Love it.
Thanks,
Have
Matt.
a good rest of your day, all.
Bye.